I'm so glad that you took that long walk to find your way into the soul of an old woman.
Matlock's cast was told to never reveal the ending. One of them just did. For most of a television season, a group of actors on one of the most watched new dramas in America carried a secret they weren't allowed to share with anyone. Not their spouses, not their closest friends on set, not even, in some cases, with each other. They knew a show built entirely around one buried question was heading toward an answer, and the people running it had decided that answer would only be allowed to exist in a locked script and in the mind of whoever wrote it. Then filming reached the middle of the season, doors closed, private conversations happened, and one by one the actors who needed to know were pulled aside and told the truth. What they said afterward, in interviews most casual viewers never saw, revealed just how tightly that secret had been guarded and how much it cost some of them to sit on it. To understand why that secrecy mattered so much, you have to go back almost 40 years, to a much gentler show that carried the same name and none of the same darkness on its surface. Matlock began on NBC on March 3, 1986, launched with a 2-hour television movie that doubled as its pilot. Dean Hargrove created the series, arriving with a resume that already included Columbo and Ellery Queen, two shows built on the same basic idea. Let the audience enjoy watching a clever, unassuming figure quietly outthink everyone around him. For his new lead, Hargrove turned to Andy Griffith, who was 59 years old and already one of the most trusted faces on American television thanks to a decade playing Sheriff Andy Taylor. That built-in trust mattered. Audiences didn't need convincing that Griffith's new character, a folksy, rumpled Georgia defense attorney named Ben Matlock, was someone worth rooting for. They already believed him. The show planted itself in Atlanta and built its formula around courtroom drama wrapped in a Southern, slightly comic tone that separated it from the sleeker legal dramas of the era. Ben Matlock wasn't flashy. He wore the same gray suit episode after episode, griped constantly about spending money, and had a well-known fondness for cheap hot dogs and cheaper diners. It became a running joke on the show and, according to people who worked with him, wasn't far from Griffith's own frugal streak. But that homespun exterior hid a razor-sharp legal mind trained at Harvard, and the show's entire rhythm depended on the gap between how Matlock appeared and how dangerous he actually was in a courtroom. He'd let a witness relax, let opposing counsel feel comfortable, let the jury assume the case was already decided, and then he'd ask one quiet question that unraveled the whole thing. Audiences kept coming back not to find out if Matlock would win, but to watch exactly how he'd get there. That formula carried the show for 9 seasons and 195 episodes, plus several television movies, an unusually long run for a legal drama of that era. NBC aired it through the 1991 to 1992 season, and even though it was still performing respectably, the network grew uneasy about its aging viewership and canceled it. ABC picked it up almost immediately, moved production to North Carolina, and kept it running for 3 more seasons until 1995. That second life on ABC, along with heavy syndication afterward, is a big part of why Matlock became such a fixture of daytime and late-night reruns for decades after its original run ended. Behind Griffith, the show's supporting cast went through constant change, and that turnover has fueled decades of fan speculation. In the early seasons, the firm felt like a family operation. Matlock's daughter Charlene worked as his partner, and Tyler Hudson ran investigations, often undercover. Charlene disappeared from the show after the first season with little explanation, and Tyler was gone by season 3. Michelle Thomas stepped in as new legal counsel and stayed through season 6. Julie March, introduced as a prosecutor, became one of the show's most memorable recurring characters, carrying a quiet, understated tension with Matlock that never overtook the legal storylines, but gave them warmth. Leanne McIntyre arrived later as another daughter-like presence and, like the others before her, eventually moved on. A lot of that turnover traces back to one person, Andy Griffith himself, who wasn't just the star of the show, but an executive producer with real authority over casting, tone, and scripts. By most accounts, he spent weekends rewriting his own courtroom dialogue and pushed, at times, for heavier material and darker personal storylines for his character. Dean Hargrove reportedly resisted a lot of that, wanting to keep the show comforting and accessible to a broad audience, and the tug-of-war between the two of them shaped the show's identity. Matlock could dig into murder, corruption, and betrayal, but it was built to still feel safe enough that viewers would return the following week. Casting under those conditions wasn't simple. Scripts regularly ran past 60 pages, packed with dense courtroom monologues that had to be delivered convincingly, and actors were often expected to prepare material for multiple characters before landing a role. Casting director Marion Doherty leaned toward performers with theater backgrounds because they could memorize quickly and adjust on the fly when Griffith rewrote a scene the night before shooting. But even a strong audition wasn't the deciding factor. By most accounts, nothing happened without Griffith's approval, whether that meant a short meeting in his dressing room or him reviewing audition tapes late at night, watching for actors who could match his rhythm in a long interrogation scene rather than actors who simply looked the part. Given how often the cast shifted, it's not surprising that fans have spent years building theories about hidden conflict behind the scenes, buried scandals, or a mysterious falling out that pushed certain actors off the show. The more mundane explanation fits the evidence far better. Long-running network dramas from that era wore people down. Contracts ended. Actors moved on to other roles. Producers reshuffled the ensemble to keep the show from feeling stale. By most accounts from people who worked on it, the day-to-day set was unusually calm and collaborative for a hit series, and Griffith brought back familiar character actors so often, particularly in judge and law enforcement roles, that longtime viewers started recognizing a kind of unofficial repertory company built into the show. It's also worth pushing back on the idea that Matlock was purely comfort television. Across its run, the writers repeatedly built entire arcs around genuinely heavy subject matter: gambling addiction, police corruption, prison violence, political scandal, and abuse of institutional power. One of the more striking examples involves a case set almost entirely inside a military courtroom, where Matlock defends a young enlisted soldier accused of stabbing his lieutenant to death. As the case unfolds, it becomes clear the lieutenant had been brutalizing the men under his command, and one soldier had already died from that abuse before the killing at the center of the trial. It's not a plot that softens anything about institutional cruelty or the culture of silence that protects it. Multi-part episodes let the writers dig even further into cases like this, giving Matlock room to work through genuinely uncomfortable material rather than wrapping everything up in 40 minutes. That history matters because it undercuts one of the more persistent pieces of Matlock fan lore: the idea of a missing or suppressed episode. Fans have spent years cataloging the original series in remarkable, almost forensic detail, tracking air dates, guest stars, and continuity across all 9 seasons. If an episode had genuinely vanished or been buried, it would show up as an obvious gap in that record, and it doesn't. The 107th episode of the original series in broadcast order is simply The Trial, an early Season 5 courtroom two-parter that appears in every official episode guide exactly where you'd expect it to. There's no missing installment, no unofficial ban, and no evidence of a buried scandal attached to any specific episode number from the original run. That myth doesn't hold up once you actually look at the record, which is fully documented across both its NBC and ABC years. The real secrecy story belongs to a completely different version of the show, one that didn't arrive until decades later. In May 2022, CBS announced a reboot, and it was clear almost immediately that this wouldn't be a simple continuation of Griffith's character. The new series cast Kathy Bates as Madeline Matlock, known to everyone around her as Maddie, a formidable older lawyer stepping back into legal practice after retirement. The reboot premiered in September 2024, and it dropped viewers into a completely different world from the original. Not a small Atlanta practice built around murder-of-the-week cases, but a large, glossy corporate firm called Jacobson Moore, dealing in major litigation and the kind of institutional secrets that can cause damage on a massive scale. The premiere lets the audience assume, at first, that they're watching a fairly standard story about an older woman proving herself inside a firm that underestimates her. Then the show turns. Maddie's last name isn't really her own, and her reason for infiltrating Jacobson Moore is deeply personal. She believes the firm helped bury a study connected to a fictional opioid drug called Welbrexa, evidence that could have warned the public about the drug's danger years earlier and potentially saved lives, including the life of her own daughter Ellie, who died of an overdose. From that point forward, the show isn't really a conventional legal drama anymore. It becomes a quiet, methodical revenge story hidden inside one, and that secret shapes every relationship Maddie builds inside the firm. Olympia Lawrence, a senior partner, becomes Maddie's boss and, over time, something more complicated than that. Part rival, part reluctant ally, always circling the question of how much Maddie actually knows. Olympia's ex-husband, Julian Marks, sits deep inside the firm's inner structure, with family ties running back to its founding. His father, Senior Marks, holds the real institutional power as managing partner, and his choices from years earlier sit at the center of everything Maddie is trying to uncover. Younger associates like Sarah Franklin and Billy Martinez, along with jury consultant Shay Banfield, widen the field of people who might know more than they're saying. Instead of solving a new case every week the way the original show did, this version keeps one central mystery running underneath the entire season. Who buried the Welbrexa study, and why? For most of the season, suspicion rotates among three people who all had access to that file and reasons to want it gone. Julian looks guilty early on simply because he handles the firm's major pharmaceutical cases and visibly carries the weight of some unresolved guilt in almost every scene. Olympia has the ambition and proximity to power that would make covering something up worth the risk. And Senior, sitting above both of them with decades of institutional control, has both the authority and the coldness to bury something and leave almost no trace. As the season heads toward its final stretch, the show tightens that uncertainty rather than resolving it early. Missing files keep resurfacing. A version of the study that doesn't match the original turns up in Olympia's safe. Julian is shown quietly obsessing over a safety deposit box he hasn't touched in years. Senior's health begins visibly declining, but the show is careful never to let that read his weakness, keeping the sense that he may still be controlling far more than he appears to. One of the clearest turning points in the season is an episode titled Belly of the Beast, which aired in early December. Maddie finally gets access to the firm's pharmaceutical team, and in the same episode a new plaintiff sues over a clinical trial with symptoms that echo the original Welbrexa case almost exactly, making the past feel uncomfortably present again. At a company holiday party in that same hour, Olympia learns something from Julian's past that helps explain why their marriage collapsed, tied directly to his role in whatever happened to the missing data. It's not a moment that resolves anything. If anything, it raises the emotional stakes further, because it leaves open the possibility that Julian is either guilty in exactly the way people feared, or that he was someone caught underneath his father's control long before the story even began. Behind the cameras, the people producing the show treated that central mystery like something close to classified information. They wanted the reveal to land on screen for the audience, not leak out early through press interviews or set gossip, and that meant limiting who actually knew the answer and for how long. When the Season 1 finale, a 2-hour episode called Tricks of the Trade, aired in April 2025, it finally answered the question the entire season had been built around. Julian was the one who physically hid the Welbrexa study roughly a decade earlier, but he did it under direct orders from his father. Senior's health begins visibly declining, but the show is careful never to let that read his weakness, keeping the sense that he may still be controlling far more than he appears to. One of the clearest turning points in the season is an episode titled Belly of the Beast, which aired in early December. Maddie finally gets access to the firm's pharmaceutical team, and in the same episode a new plaintiff sues over a clinical trial with symptoms that echo the original Welbrexa case almost exactly, making the past feel uncomfortably present again. At a company holiday party in that same hour, Olympia learns something from Julian's past that helps explain why their marriage collapsed, tied directly to his role in whatever happened to the missing data. It's not a moment that resolves anything. If anything, it raises the emotional stakes further, because it leaves open the possibility that Julian is either guilty in exactly the way people feared, or that he was someone caught underneath his father's control long before the story even began. Behind the cameras, the people producing the show treated that central mystery like something close to classified information. They wanted the reveal to land on screen for the audience, not leak out early through press interviews or set gossip, and that meant limiting who actually knew the answer and for how long. When the Season 1 finale, a 2-hour episode called Tricks of the Trade, Aired in April 2025, it finally answered the question the entire season had been built around. Julian was the one who physically hid the Wellbrexa study roughly a decade earlier, but he did it under direct orders from his father.